Shalom. I am Rabbi Nathan Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. I'm speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. In today's short Devar Torah, I'm going to discuss the Parsha of this week. This is the Parsha of Vayera. Vayera has in it, among other things, the story of the Akeda. You will recall that both Avraham and Sarah were barren. They didn't have any children until Sarah was 90 years old, Avraham was 100 years old. And then they finally had a son, Yitzchak. This Parsha, we have a very strange command that Avraham, nonetheless, is eager to fulfill. What's the command? The command is about the Akeda. The Torah begins, the Parsha of the Akeda begins, after these things happen, then Elohim Nisas Avraham, then God tested Avraham. Well, we know that Avraham had 10 different tests that God gave to him, all to demonstrate the love between Avraham and God. And this test, the Akeda, was the most difficult of all of the tests, as you can well imagine. What did God say to him? He said, Kachnu es bincha, take your son. Whereby Avraham said, well, I have two sons. I have Yitzchak and I have Yishmael. He says, es yechidecha, your only son. Well, I have Yishmael is the only son to Hagar. Yitzchak is the only son to my wife Sarah. He says, Asher ahavta, who you love. He says, I love both of them. And Hashem tells Es Yitzchak, take Yitzchak and do what? He says, go to this place, to the land of Moriah, ultimately meaning to go to Jerusalem, the place where the temple stands now, or where it did stand. And bring up your son there for a burnt offering. Al achar ahorim asher omer halecha, upon one of the mountains. Avraham Avinu, our father Avraham, was so interested in fulfilling God's commandments that he didn't hesitate. And the next sentence says, Vayashkim Avraham baboker. He didn't waste any time. He got up right early in the morning and he saddled his donkey himself and he chopped the wood for himself. Well, why did he have to chop the wood now? He's got a 3-day journey. Didn't he think he'd find wood along the way? Of course he thought there'd be wood along the way, but he understood that the zeal for doing a mitzvah, doing the command of God, is greatest at the beginning. That's why we say a bracha. When we make a bracha for somebody, say Asher Kiddushan mitzvos, God has made us holy with the mitzvah. So he wanted to right at the beginning, just in case anything happened and he couldn't fulfill it, he wanted to have that zeal to go through and do what God commanded him. Now, he got up to Mount Moriah, and you can imagine the anguish as he's finding his son. His son is 37 years old, Yitzchak. They're both having anguish. And there's a very interesting midrash that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But the incident of the Akeda is often cited as the paradigm for the degree in which we must have Emuna in God, have faith in God, no matter what God is telling us. And from the manner that that Avraham dealt with this command and the anguish he was going through, we can learn a lesson as to how to deal with pain and tragedy in our own lives. Rabbi Avraham Twersky brings the Medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni. And the Medrash in Yalkut Shimoni says about this incident, he says, Vayasam also al Mizbeach, Eini Avraham, Eini Yitzchak. Avraham looked into Yitzchak's eyes on the altar, Then Yitzchak b'shmei Shemaim, Yitzchak's eyes were looking at heaven. The most meneshros v'nofelas be'eni Avraham. Tears were streaming from the eyes of Avraham. Tears were streaming from him until there was literally a wall of tears that were falling. He was in such anguish about what he thought God wanted him to do. God told him to bring him up for an offering. He thought he meant to offer him. And Rabbi Twersky brings the Midrash that I just cited, and he quotes Reb Henoch Leibowitz, and he says that despite the fact that Avraham wants to do any mitzvah, any commandment that God is telling him, nonetheless, he's a human being, and he feels the pain of, God forbid, having to sacrifice his only son. And the Alter of Slobodka asks, he says, we know the greatness of Avraham Avinu. He had great mastery over his emotions. So why didn't he use this mastery, this self-mastery, to suppress the feelings for Yitzchak? And the Alter of Slobodka says, because it is not God's desire that we as human beings should be devoid of all natural emotions, but what we should do is we should have the emotions. Don't be afraid of the pain. Don't be afraid of the emotion for the pain. Don't be afraid of the sadness and the feelings and the anguish that the pain might cause, but you have to learn to suppress them to fulfill God's will. And Rabbi Twersky illustrates this point by a story he tells of his grandfather, Reb Mottel of Hornersteipel. And his grandfather had a library that had many, many valuable manuscripts in this library, irreplaceable manuscripts. And one day, unfortunately, the library caught on fire, destroyed all of these valuable manuscripts. His anguish of Ramatullah Hornersteipel was without bounds. He was totally dejected. He just was in such a depressed, anguished mood. And suddenly he turns to his Hasidim, to his followers, and he says, it says in Gemara Barachos, Keshem shemevorchim al hatov, mevorchim al hara. Just as we are commanded to bless God and to thank God for the good, so too must we bless God and thank God for the bad. So he says, if I had come into a great fortune, all of you would be asking to celebrate with me. You'd be having l'chaim together. And now we also have to have a l'chaim for this. Hearing that, one of the Hasidim said, but wait a minute. You were just such anguish a few moments ago. And he says to him, yes. He says, when a person experiences adversity, you have to feel the pain. Hashem does not want us to be devoid of emotions. But now that you have felt the pain, after you have felt the pain, then you must have Emuna. You must have belief in God that everything that God does is for the ultimate good. And therefore, we thank God for what appears to be bad, just as we thank God for the good. And we all have a l'chaim, drink a l'chaim to every part of our life, the part that are obviously good, and unfortunately the part that are painful. Let us try to emulate the Emuna, the faith of our forefather Avraham Avinu. That is what will get us through any difficult times that we have. If you remember always that the light always follows the darkness, and you can sometimes, if you look, you can always find light in the greatest darkness. Thank you for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat, and I hope everybody is safe and healthy uh, and coping with whatever Hashem sends your way. Shabbat Shalom.